If you're looking to learn how to prompt, this video is for you. Why should you trust me? Well, I've written tens of thousands of prompts in production workflows, and so I do know what I'm talking about here. So if somebody came to me today and said that they wanted to get started learning AI and getting the most out of AI, I would tell them to start with prompting, because prompting is fundamentally how we interact with the AI. A software engineer could be very talented at coding and stuff like that, but until they know how to prompt, they can't call themselves an AI engineer. So with that out of the way, I'm going to give you 7 tips to be better at prompting. So the first step is to understand the assignment. You need to understand what we're prompting for. A lot of people will prompt for certain things and they will be vague and it'll be jumbled. It'll be kind of like a stream of consciousness instead of actually being clear and structured. But to get that clear and structured, it needs to be clear and structured in here first. So first step is to understand in detail exactly what we're putting into the AI and exactly what we're getting out. So tip number 2 is to be direct and literal. This is just across the board, right? You don't want to be vague with the AI, really ever. It doesn't help you. The AI doesn't think the way we do. It just predicts. And so if you give it a structured framework, you can get out a really good response. Whereas if you give it just whatever and you make it guess, that guessing is where you end up getting things that you don't want. So it's like if you have somebody who is very good at following directions, but very bad at making it up as they go, right? A person like that, you would want to give very specific instructions, and then you could be confident that they would carry them out. If you instead try to give them vague instructions and hope that they can think of something good, you're not going to get a good result. So you should treat AI like that. So tip number 3 is to understand actually how LLMs work. So you don't need to go into transformer architecture and Markov chains and deep learning and all the math behind that, backpropagation, if you don't want to. But it's important to understand that LLMs use the tokens in their context window to predict the next token. That next token becomes part of that context window and predicts the next token. So it keeps going and going and going, and it operates on this principle that the next token depends on all the other tokens in the context window. So that means all the tokens in your prompt, all the tokens in whatever information you inject into that prompt, if you're using variable, and any skills that it comes up with. So the chats have a lot of tool calls, they can do web search. That gets pulled into the context as well, and that affects the output. Understanding that is very important, and it brings me to my next point, which is that you have to put the most important information at the end of your prompt. The reason you have to put the most important information at the end of your prompt is because, as I said before, all the context goes toward predicting the next token, and it tends to weight the tokens that are most recent more, because if it's trying to predict the next token, that makes sense. Let's say that you're in the middle of a sentence, right? You're probably going to think about the words in that sentence more so than the words 3 paragraphs up if you're trying to predict the next word in that sentence, right? So the LLM kind of thinks like that because those more recent tokens have more impact on what's coming out. So if you have a prompt, you need to make sure that you put the most important instruction at the end. The next step is a little bit more advanced. Once you've understood the basics, you need to include fail-safes. So this is particularly important for system prompts, where you don't want it to hallucinate. There's no foolproof way to prevent hallucination all the time, but what you can do is you can get the LLM to say, if you don't know the answer, output nothing, or output null, or output I don't know. That's one example. Or if you're using variables and sometimes the variables don't work or come up blank, You don't want the LLM to hallucinate, which it'll sometimes do in system prompts. And so you can say, if the variable is blank or you don't have this information, right, not enough information, or something like that. It's very simple, but it can have a big impact, and it's surprising that a lot of people don't use it. So including fail-safes can very much increase the reliability of your LLM prompts in your app. Getting up to number 6, we have be creative. Now, this is more applicable to when you're prompting agents. I could go into the different types of prompts, but right now I'm trying to keep it very high level. But there are different types of prompts. You can prompt a chat. You can prompt an agent. You can make a prompt for a system prompt, which is basically like a function call in an app. And so you're going to approach those differently. For agents, you can actually be a little bit more creative, because if they understand, they can loop through and pull tool calls, come back to your prompt. Every agent harness has a different way of operating, but you can be a little bit more creative because they tend to be more dynamic with how they allocate context. But one of the ways, for example, of being creative that I've used is when I'm getting an AI agent to review code. I'll say, look through this code. I know for a fact there's at least 10 mistakes in there. Now, I haven't looked at it myself. I don't know that. But what that does is it forces the AI agent to think, oh wait, I need to look through this. There's more than 10 mistakes in here. And sometimes it comes back with 7 and is like, sorry, I couldn't find the others. And sometimes it comes back with more than 10. The point is you kind of forced it to look. Whereas if you just said, scan this for mistakes, it might have been a little lazy and it might not have given you anything. Or it might have given you 3 mistakes that it found instead of the 12 that were there. So that's an example of being creative. But what I like about prompting is that it's a little bit of an art. It's not the same as coding, where coding, there's kind of a right and wrong answer, and there's a better way of doing things and a worse way. How long did it take to run? Did it accomplish the goal? Etc., etc. Whereas prompting, it's definitely more of getting a feel for it. It's not clear cut, and you actually don't want to, I've seen software engineers do this. You don't want to prompt the way you code. You don't want to have it go, if this, then, X, and have no creativity in it, because it really is an art. These LLMs, because they've gotten so big, there's so many variables involved, and they're not so predictable. So that's important. So that sort of artistic, creative aspect kind of brings me to my last point, which is you got to practice. Practice makes perfect, and prompting is no exception. I've spent around 60 hours a week with AI on average for the past year. I probably interact more with AI than with people now, which is kind of sad. But you really do need to practice. Maybe not that intensely for whatever your goals are, but being constantly iterating and prompting and getting the feedback and trying new things is really important if you want to develop this kind of feel, like I was talking about earlier, where it's not like there's a right or wrong answer, but you're going to get a feel more and more for how these LLMs work. And the only way to do that is to prompt like crazy. Now, if you do have the money to spend on it, I would recommend signing up for the pro plans and getting more usage and stuff like that. I think they're really worth it. If you can't afford the $200 a month or whatever Codex is, I get that. But the $20 a month, or even if you can't, you can just sign up for the free plans. There's a bunch of different models out there. Don't restrict yourself to ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini. There's a whole bunch of models coming out of China that you can test out as well. There's ZAI, Kimi, a whole bunch of open models, DeepSeek, of course. So test those out. A lot of those are free, or they have a free plan, and you can get a lot of practice with those free plans. So yeah, practice, practice, practice. Very important. So that's the end. If you have any questions about any of the techniques I described in this video, just drop a comment and I'll be happy to answer.